The wind had teeth that night, long and sharp, and it bit deep into the high plains of Wyoming. Snow fell sideways, whipped into a frenzy by the blizzard rolling down off the mountains like some great white beast. The trees groaned under the weight of it. Even the wolves were quiet. Caleb McGraw stirred the fire with the toe of his boot. His faithful hound, Bo, curled at his feet. The cabin was small, just one room and a loft above, but it was solid, built with hands that had known the weight of an axe and the patience of winter. Caleb poured himself a tin of coffee, bitter and thick, just the way he liked it. He hadn't planned on staying in these parts for long. After burying his brother last spring, he'd taken the deed to the old trapper's cabin and figured it'd do for a season or two, long enough to catch his breath, maybe make peace with the ghosts that walked alongside him. Bo lifted his head, ears perked. "What is it, boy?" Caleb asked, rising slowly. Then came the sound, faint but real, a cry on the wind. Not animal, not storm, human. Caleb grabbed his coat and lantern, his old rifle slung over his shoulder, more out of habit than fear. Bo was already at the door, pawing at it, tail stiff. Together, they pushed into the storm, snow dragging at their boots like a beggar's hand. They found her near the ravine, curled up in a drift, half covered in snow. She weren't much more than a shape in the dark, but Bo barked once and Caleb saw her hand, bare, blue-fingered, sticking out of the white. "Lord above," he muttered. She was still breathing, just barely. Caleb scooped her up, felt how light she was, like bones and frost, and not much else. She murmured something, a name maybe, or a prayer, and then went still again. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He brought her inside, laid her by the fire, stripped off her frozen coat, wrapped her in every blanket he had. Her skin was pale as ghost light, her lips tinged purple, her boots soaked through. It wasn't until he saw the long scar across her side, half-healed and angry, that he began to wonder just what kind of storm he'd let inside his home. Come morning, the storm had quieted some. Snow lay heavy against the windows, sealing the world outside in silence. Caleb sat in his rocker, the embers still warm on the hearth, both stretched out beside the cot where the woman lay. Her breath was shallow but stronger than it had been hours ago. She stirred just after dawn, her eyes flickering open. They were the color of river ice, blue and sharp, but clouded with pain and something else, something hidden. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice a rasp. "Safe," Caleb said, keeping his tone low. "You were near froze when we found you. Bo here led me to you." She looked at the dog, and for a moment her lips almost twitched into a smile. But then her hand moved to her side, where the scar lay beneath the bandages Caleb had wrapped. Her eyes darkened. "I didn't steal nothing," she whispered. Caleb tilted his head. "I didn't say you did." She tried to sit up but winced, and he was on his feet in a second, one hand out, not to stop her, but to steady. "You got a name?" he asked, gentle. She hesitated. "Nora," she said finally. "Nora Gray." He nodded slow. "I'm Caleb, and that's all I need to know for now." But Bo, ever sharper than most men, growled low when she said her name. Caleb didn't think much of it at the time. Bo had a nose for coyotes and trouble both, and this storm had stirred plenty of each. Nora wouldn't say more. Not about where she came from, not about the scar, and certainly not why she had a bullet hole in her coat that Caleb had patched without a skin. For 3 days she stayed in the cabin, healing slow, watching Caleb with wary eyes like a fox waiting for the snare to spring. And Caleb, he didn't push. He'd known too many folks running from something, sometimes the law, sometimes their past, often both. But the truth has a way of scratching at the walls, and it weren't long before the wind brought more than snow to Caleb's front porch. It brought riders. They came at dusk, when the snow had turned to slush and the sky was painted in shades of dying coal. 3 of them, riding hard up the ridge trail, one lean and tall, one squat as a whiskey barrel, and the last with a limp that rocked his saddle with every step. They weren't wearing badges, but trouble don't always ride in uniform. Caleb stood at the window, rifle leaned against the wall, jaw tight. Nora saw the way his hand hovered near it and followed his gaze. "Friends of yours?" she asked, voice thin. "Don't reckon," Caleb muttered. Bo growled deep at his throat. The lead rider didn't bother knocking. He dismounted and strode right up to the cabin door like it belonged to him, dusting snow off his shoulders. Caleb opened the door slow, just wide enough. "Evening," the man said. "Name's Renner. Looking for a woman come through these parts. Said to be wearing a blue coat, dark hair. Answers to the name Nora Gray. Might have passed this way a few days back." Caleb's face stayed blank. "Ain't seen no one but snow in my own boots." Renner gave a slow, humorless smile. "That's so." Inside, Nora held her breath. Caleb didn't turn, didn't give her away with a single glance. "We got reason to believe she shot a man," Renner added. "Law and Sundown's interested. So's the man's brother." Caleb didn't blink. "Don't know nothing about that." Renner studied him a long moment. The wind whistled through the pines, like it was holding its breath too. "Mind if we come in and get warm?" Renner asked. "I do, actually." There was a pause, long and cold. Then Renner laughed, not kindly. "You always this hospitable." "Only to guests I invite." Behind him, Bo stepped into the doorway, hackles raised. Renner looked at the dog, then at Caleb, and spat into the snow. "We'll be nearby," he said. "Don't go wandering off." He turned and walked back to his horse, the other two following, silent as grave dirt. When the riders were gone, Caleb shut the door, bolted it slow. Turned to Nora. "Anything you want to tell me?" Nora stared at the floor. Her hands trembled. "I didn't shoot him," she said at last. "Not first." The fire cracked loud in the silence that followed her words. "I didn't shoot him first," Nora repeated, voice low, like she was confessing to the floorboards. "His name was Eli Santee. He was the marshal in Sundown least. He wore the badge." Caleb stayed quiet. He didn't move, didn't speak, just listened like a man used to pulling truth from silence. "He came after me," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Said he needed a housekeeper for the jail, just someone to sweep up and cook. But he wanted more than that. I told him no." Her voice caught, and she looked away. "Didn't matter." Bo whined low, sensing the hurt in her voice better than any man could. "He said no one would believe me. Said I was just a barmaid, a girl who'd worked too many rail towns. That no one'd care if I disappeared." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he still said nothing. "So I ran, and he followed. Cornered me outside of Deacon's Crossing. Tried to drag me off. I had Pa's pistol in my satchel. Didn't think, I just pulled it." She looked up then, her eyes blazing. "He drew first. I swear on what's left of my soul. But I hit him first." Caleb nodded slow. "And the men outside?" "His brothers," she said. "Rafe Jory and Sim Santee. They were never law. Just mean. They want blood, not justice." Outside, the wind had picked up again, the kind that carried the weight of coming trouble. Caleb stepped to the fire, took down the rifle from its place above the hearth, and checked the chamber. "Then we best be ready," he said, his voice like dry gravel. "Santee boys ain't known for riding off quiet." Nora looked at him, eyes wide. "You believe me?" He shrugged, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. "I've seen men lie for less. And I've seen women run for good reason." He tossed her a bundle wrapped in canvas. Inside was an old revolver, cleaned and oiled. "It's yours now. You shoot only if you gotta." Nora took it with both hands, her breath shaky. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, but the storm wasn't over. "No, ma'am, not by a long shot." That night the snow turned to ice, coating every branch and roof tile in a glassy sheen. Caleb banked the fire low, kept the lamps dim. Nora sat at the table, the revolver beside her, hands wrapped tight, round a mug of chicory brew. "Bo sleepin'?" she asked. Caleb shook his head. "Bo don't sleep when death's within sniffing distance. He'll let us know if they're comin'." Nora nodded. She hadn't said much since the sun went down, just kept her eyes on the door like it might turn into fire and fury any second. Caleb had seen that look before, in soldiers after Shiloh, in mothers after the raiders came through. She had that same tightness to her jaw, like she was trying not to come apart at the seams. Just before midnight, Bo barked once, sharp, low warning. Caleb was already on his feet. "They're back," he said, lifting the rifle. He cracked the door just a hair and peered out. Sure enough, the Santee brothers had made camp just down the ridge, their fire low, horses hobbled and stomping in the snow. Couldn't be more than 200 yards off. Close enough to strike by morning. "You figure they'll wait?" Nora asked, loading a cartridge into the revolver with steady hands. "They ain't drunk enough for a midnight charge," Caleb said. "But dawn, that's when cowards grow bold." He crossed to the back of the cabin, knelt near a floorboard, and pried it up. Beneath was a burlap sack, and inside it dynamite, 3 sticks, sweat-stained and wrapped tight. "Mining days," Caleb explained. "Kept them in case I ever had a problem that needed more than words." Nora stared. "You plan to blow him up?" He gave a dry chuckle. "No, ma'am. Just remind them that some hills ain't worth dying on." They spent the rest of the night setting traps, laying tripwire, and stacking wood in the stove to keep the smoke low. Nora moved with purpose, her fear buried beneath layers of hard-earned survival. Caleb watched her work and knew she was no damsel. She'd bled already. She wasn't scared of more. Dawn broke slow, pale and cold. The wind had stilled. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. The first shot came not long after sunrise. Caleb fired back, without hesitation, pegged Jen, the squat one, in the leg as he tried to sneak up behind the shed. Bo took off through the trees like a ghost, drawing one of the Santee boys wide into the brush. Nora, crouched by the woodpile, raised her pistol and waited. Another shot cracked, close. Nora stood quick, turned, and came face to face with Rafe Santee. "Found ya," he snarled. But she didn't blink, didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The shot rang through the valley, louder than the wind, and Rafe Santee dropped like a sack of wet grain. The echo of the gunshot hadn't yet died when Nora dropped behind the woodpile, heart pounding like a war drum. She'd never killed a man before, not till now. But Rafe Santee had meant to end her. She'd seen it in his eyes, right up to the moment the light left him. Caleb was already moving, flanking wide around the cabin with the rifle cradled to his shoulder. Bo barked once from the pines, sharp and quick. "One down," he called low to Nora. "Two still breathing." She nodded, gripping the revolver tight. Her hands were shaking now, not from cold. "Hold steady," Caleb said, crouching beside her. "You done fine." They both knew this wasn't over. From the ridge, a voice bellowed out, gruff, raw, laced with fury. "You think you're a hero, McGraw?" That was Sim Santee. "You're protecting a killer." Caleb answered with silence. Words wouldn't buy him much. Sim kept on. "That woman murdered our brother. My kin. She defended herself." Caleb called back finally. "You want justice. There's a court in Laramie. You want vengeance. Then step into the clearing and see what it gets you." The reply came in lead. Bullets tore through the edge of the shed, splintering wood and kicking snow. Caleb dropped flat, aimed and fired once, clean and true. Then twice more, just to keep the pressure high. Behind the cabin, Bo snarled and lunged, a blur of fur and teeth. A scream followed, and then silence. Nora peeked round the shed. "That the dog?" Caleb grunted. "Yup. Bo don't miss when it matters." Moments passed. Then movement. Sim Santee, stumbling into the open, blood trailing down one leg. But he still had his pistol. He raised it. Nora didn't think. She stepped forward and fired once, then again. Sim dropped to his knees. "I'll see you in hell," he spat, blood thick on his lips. "Already been," Nora said, voice steady. Didn't like the company. He fell face first into the snow, the last of the Santee name carried off by the wind. Caleb exhaled long and slow. Bo trotted back, fermented with blood, not his own. "That all of 'em?" Nora asked. Caleb scanned the tree line. "Ain't hearin' no more horses. I reckon that's it." They stood together in the snow, breath fogged in the air, guns still warm. "You just made enemies," Nora said, holstering her pistol with a shiver. "I've had worse," Caleb replied. "And besides, I didn't do it for you." She blinked, surprised. "I did it for the truth," he said. and for the kind of peace that don't come from turning a blind eye. Then quieter. Now come on. Let's get you inside. They walked back to the cabin, side by side. Behind them, 3 bodies lay still in the snow. Ahead of them, something else. Not safety, maybe, but something mighty close. They buried the Santee brothers, just beyond the tree line, under a bluff of pines where the wind didn't cut so sharp. Caleb didn't offer much ceremony, just a shovel and a few quiet words. Nora watched from the edge, coat pulled tight, eyes unreadable. They won't be missed, she said when it was done. No, Caleb agreed, but death still deserves dirt. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Caleb cleaned the rifle, Nora boiled water, and both slept by the hearth, one ear twitching every so often. The cabin felt smaller now, the silence heavier. That evening, Nora sat by the fire, holding a mug of warm cider Caleb had brewed from old apples and stubbornness. She hadn't spoken much since the shooting. Caleb let her sit with it. Finally, she said, "You ever kill a man?" He looked into the flames, let the moment stretch. "Too many. Did it ever get easier?" "No," he said, "but sometimes it stops sudden in the same place." Nora nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Later, she dug through her satchel and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a folded paper, worn at the edges. She handed it to him. "This is why Eli wanted me gone," she said. "It's a deed." Caleb's brow furrowed. He opened it slow. Sure enough, it was a land grant. South of Rawlins. Good land. River-fed. "It belonged to my father," she said. "Passed to me. Eli found out and said it'd be safer in his hands. I said no." Caleb whistled low. "That ain't just a patch of dirt. That's a future." She met his gaze. "I didn't run to escape justice. I ran to protect what's mine." He folded the deed and handed it back. "Then we best see you get there." She blinked. "You mean come with me?" Caleb stood, stretched, the firelight casting shadows over his face. "Ain't much left here for me. Just ghosts and trees that whisper too much." Bo thumped his tail once on the floor. "I reckon I could use a change of sky," Caleb added. Nora watched him, searching for the catch, but there was none. "You sure?" He gave her a look that said more than any words. "I'm not saying I know where we'll end up," she said softly, "but it ain't here." "No," Caleb replied, "and it ain't alone neither." Outside, the wind had died down. The snow had hardened into crust, and the stars blinked clear for the first time in days. They set out 2 days later, just after dawn broke gold over the frozen hills. Caleb packed light, rifle, tools, dry goods. Nora bundled her deed and a few keepsakes in a canvas satchel. Bo trotted ahead, tail high, sniffing the trail like he'd been born for it. They rode double on Caleb's horse for the first stretch, until they found a second mount at a lined shack he'd helped build years before. Wasn't much, an old chestnut mare named Junebug, half blind in one eye but steady as the day is long. Nora didn't complain once about the cold or the miles. Caleb noticed that. She had a spine like hickory bark, scarred but solid. At night, they camped by riverbeds or under bluff ledges, firelight dancing in their eyes. Caleb would cook beans and jerky. Nora would hum soft tunes, old ones from before her voice had been taken by fear. And slowly, like spring to win a river, the silence between them began to flow. "You think they'll come looking?" she asked one evening. Fingers warmed around a tin cup. "The Santee boys?" Caleb shook his head. "Word'll spread. They won't find many friends." She nodded but didn't smile. "You trust me?" she asked then, sudden-like. He didn't answer right away. Just poked at the fire, thinking. "Trust comes slow," he said at last. "But I figure if you were going to shoot me in the back, you'd be done it by now." That earned him a real laugh. Soft, short, but real. They reached the edge of the land by the 5th day, wide and open, flanked by cottonwoods and backed by snow-capped ridges. The deed had been true. Water ran clean down from the hills, the soil dark with promise. "This is it," Nora whispered, eyes mist in over. Caleb looked around, nodding slow. "Good ground." She turned to him, wind tugging her coat. "I want to build here. Not just a house. A life." Caleb studied her for a beat, then said, "I ain't much for speeches, Nora Gray, but if you'll have me, I reckon I can swing a hammer." Bo barked once, tail thumping in agreement, and right there, in the middle of nowhere, two people who'd known nothing but lost decided to lay down roots. Spring came slow to that stretch of Wyoming. Snowmelt fed the creek, and the land soaked it up like a thirsty child. Caleb and Nora got to work right away, cutting logs, framing walls, stacking stone for the hearth. It wasn't easy, but then again, nothing worth keeping ever is. They worked like two halves of the same soul, quiet, steady, always moving toward something they could both believe in. Caleb built with the sure hands of a man who'd seen enough wreckage to know what lasting looked like. Nora planned a garden rose and stitched curtains from old feed sacks, humming under her breath. Bo stood guard through it all, nose in the wind, always watching. The cabin rose by midsummer, a simple square with a sloped roof and a porch wide enough for sitting. Inside was one room for now, but they talked about adding more. Not just for comfort, for hope. They celebrated with stew and biscuits on the porch, stars hanging low and bright above. Nora leaned back in the rocker, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. "Feels like something," she said. "Something real." Caleb nodded, passing her the cider jug. "Feels like home." For a while, things were quiet. They built up the land, found neighbors miles out who lent seeds and stories, even caught wind of a circuit judge coming through the territory, a man who didn't take kindly to the kind of justice the Santees tried to claim. Nora filed the deed official. Caleb wired the post back east. Nothing much, just a name and a location, in case anyone ever came looking. But peace has a way of stirring old ashes. One evening in early fall, Bo started barking, not loud but urgent. Caleb stepped out with his rifle. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, clean-shaven, wearing city clothes that didn't match the dust on his boots. He held up one hand, the other gripping a satchel. "Looking for Miss Nora Gray," he said. "I have a message." Nora appeared behind Caleb, eyes narrowing. The man nodded at her. "It's from Judge Beaumont. You're requested to testify in Sundown. New trial. Charges dropped. The town wants to clean its hands." She stepped forward slow. "And if I don't come?" The man's smile was tight. "Then the truth stays buried and the liars win." Caleb glanced at her, then back at the stranger. "You got a name?" "Wesley Holt. I'm a lawyer." Nora looked down at her calloused hands, then at the cabin they'd built, the fields they'd planted, the dog they'd come to trust. Then she met Caleb's eyes. "I'm tired of running," she said. "Then we'll ride together," he replied. They rode into sundown 3 days later, just as the sun began its slow descent over the dust-swept main street. The town looked the same as it always had in Nora's memory, small, sharp-edged, and too full of eyes that didn't blink near enough. But she didn't flinch. Caleb rode beside her, silent and solid, Bo padding close behind. They were a trio now, bonded by survival and something stronger. Judge Beaumont's office sat above the general store, windows cracked open to let in the last of the light. Holt met them there, tipping his hat. "They're expecting you tomorrow. Trial's at noon. Whole town will be there." Caleb nodded. "Then we'll be ready." That night, they stayed at the boarding house on the edge of town, the kind that didn't ask questions if you paid up front. Nora paced while Caleb cleaned his rifle slow and methodical. "You think they'll listen?" she asked. "They'll hear you," he said. "What they do with it's not ours to control." She stared out the window, toward the courthouse steps. "I just want it over." Caleb stood, laid a hand on her shoulder. "It's already ending, Nora. You came back. That's more than most ever do." The next day dawned hot and cloudless. The courtroom was packed with townsfolk, some curious, some scornful, some just there for the show. Nora sat straight at the front, hair tied back, face calm but fierce. She told them everything. About Eli, about the deed, about what really happened by the river's edge. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She told it plain, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. Holt followed with documents, statements, and a letter from a witness, one of the deputy's wives, who'd seen the bruises Eli left. The prosecutor sputtered, but his case was hollow. And when the judge banged the gavel down, his voice rang clear. This court finds Nora Gray not guilty. Case dismissed. Nora exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for a year. Caleb nodded once. Bo barked like he understood. As they stepped out into the sun, the townsfolk parted like wheat before a scythe. Some nodded, some looked away, but no one stopped her. Later, as they rode out of sundown, Nora turned in her saddle, one last glance over her shoulder. "Feels lighter," she said. Caleb smiled, soft and slow. "That's what happens when you stop running." They rode into the setting sun, toward their land, toward a life of plowing and planting and sitting quiet on the porch, toward something built not on fear, but on trust and grit, and the kind of love that don't need speaking every day to be felt. And behind them, the wind swept clean the tracks of a woman once half frozen and a man who never asked her to be anything but who she was.